All right. So we have our class on counterplay. Here's our first position. So it's black to move. So first, let's analyze this position. What is it that white's trying to do? And well, why does black need counterplay? So imagine you had your opponent's pieces. A lot of this is really just about thinking for your opponent. So if you had the white pieces, well, what would you be trying to do here? What are some of the imbalances? We want to break down the imbalances. So we look at the differences in the positions, right? That's the Jeremy Silva technique. So we look at pawn structure, right? We look at, well, material on the board. We have all the pieces, right? So meaning we have a lot of attacking potential for both of us. In terms of pawn structure, we will look at space. Who has more space? We could see those three pawns give white a lot of space to give him more maneuverability, right? So our pawns are a lot more compact. We moved 4 pawns up 1 square each, right? So we're very compact in there. And white has moved 1, 2, he's moved 3 up, 4 up, 2 squares each. So you see they have a lot. They can even bring the rook up this way. They could come up, they have a lot of maneuverability, right? So they have some attacking potential. And what do you think white would do that would be the most dangerous thing? The most dangerous thing they can do.
That's the
Okay, so Leah, you're saying you're looking at the space advantage in the center. What are you
and
observing?
also with the knights. The knights also help white control the center.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and this will come out of a Sicilian, right? Sicilian where white goes e4 and black goes c5. Almost certainly those were the first moves of this game. So e4, c5, and then the knight comes out and white goes d4. We trade them off. So in a open Sicilian, we have that trade, and then white gets a lot of centralization. But keep in mind that the d pawn has been traded for the c pawn. So white has given up one of his 2 central pawns. See, black has both, right? So black does have 2. They're compact, but they may pack a punch. We do have 2 of them. White only has 1. Okay, so we have. And
I
what else
also
do you
think
notice there?
that I feel like the fifth rank is kind of a no man's land analogy because both black and white have pawns and pieces, particularly knights, I guess in the case of white, that are controlling the squares on the fifth rank, and so it's not really it's like it's more difficult to I don't want to say it's more difficult, but like wherever you move, it's going to be contested.
Well, yeah, it is difficult. I mean, or not that desirable. Although interestingly, they're actually. Let's see. Well, what could someone actually go? Where could someone actually go? Perhaps c5. That's all I'm noticing right now. Black can go hop into c5, but pretty much everything else. A lot of it's. I mean, yeah. What in terms of which pieces currently could just hop forward? Well, we see
I was
knights,
thinking,
but yeah, it's pretty tough, right? Just
I was
this guy. That's
thinking
about it.
of what I was thinking, which may or may not be correct, was that white could forcibly break through with f5, black takes back with e pawn, and then um no, that wouldn't work.
Well, now thinking, okay, so let's make sure we've exhausted all of our analysis. We have pretty much the full assessment as much as we can reasonably be of the current position, and then let's look at the candidate moves. But in terms of just the general sense, you're thinking, okay, how does white actually kind of uncork this position? So maybe in that case, we'll look at multiple moves, right? Any of those pawns on the 4th rank might launch for us. So we'll look at each one of those, unless it's something else. But some way of strike. I see what you're looking at though, because you're thinking, well, white's on the 4th rank with the pawn, so you gotta strike at something, right? That's a great observation about this. I like that how you said no man's land, right? Nobody wants to go there, except, yeah, as I mentioned, I wouldn't mind bringing my knight there with black. If you look at it from black's perspective, that's a nice place to hop into, right? But yeah, so we have the space advantage for white, lots of centralization. One other factor that's important is the kings. Well, there may be a couple of, well, we have like the half open C file for black, half open D file for white, because there's only one pawn there for white, one black. There's that too. So black has some play on that C file. And as I said, knight C5, white may have the D file, and there's the rook lifting. So that's about it. Besides that, we've broken it down. And then the king safety. So we got to look at our respective kings. Think, okay, whose king is safer? What are some, and why? And what are some prospects? What do you guys think about the kings? Whose king feels, I don't know, more comfortable and why?
I have mixed feelings here.
Okay.
I mean, okay, the white king only has one pawn in front of him at this stage. So he's seems more vulnerable to attack. On the other hand, he has, you may not call it a fortress, but you know, he's got four pieces within a couple squares of him.
That's true too. Yeah. Yeah. Look at that.
And
Two bishops.
and
That's all help
and
out.
the white pawns, you know, are already on the fourth rank. And you know, the black king's, most of his pieces are on the queen side of the board, so he seems like, while he's got all his pawns right in front of him while he's castled, he's also got the possibility of a pawn storm coming down his throat within just a couple of moves.
Right, right. We've got now, as you said, kind of mixed. Well, the mixed feelings, imagine some of that comes from the fact that the pawns are, you were getting at that. The pawns have pushed, and so it's got attacking and defensive potential, right? In terms of rather, the queen, the bishops are nearby. The pawns have pushed, so they've kind of opened up the king, but they also allow white to launch an attack, right? And it's not like white's king is immediately exposed, but there is some exposure by pushing those pawns. Now you said there's one pawn in front of it. There's one pawn immediately in front. I mean, I guess you could say these pawns are kind of in front of the king. They're just not that close, right? They're
Right.
they're very drafty in there, right? So if white isn't careful, then black's pieces may in the future, I mean, end up there. What if these pieces get traded off? Well, stuff comes in, what if, look at that bishop. What if that bishop opens? It's not impossible for that bishop to end up opening up later on. So white will have to be careful in many cases, right? And also there are a lot of, once you start parsing this out, right? So you start breaking it down, we notice more and more little details, right? About the position. Another thing when we talk about pawn structure, so things associated with pawn structure. That might actually be useful I could jot it down here. Because there's a lot of stuff that's just tied to pawn structure. We say pawns are the soul of chess. So I may as well jot some of that down to get really a comprehensive analysis of the position. And only then do we actually think about the actual moves, right? So I'll make it black here for now. So you could just kind of, that way I can actually, let's do this. Okay, wait a second. Don't want to show you guys the actual moves. We'll go here. But this is between Botvinnik and Rogozin, 1930. Sometimes you'll see that spelled with a Z. Usually I see Ragozi. This is spelled with an S in this case. So we have this. All right. So we'll fill in a few things. So when we talk about pawn structure, some of the elements that we can cover under pawn structure would be space. That's a big one, because the pawns are like your fortress, right? They give you more maneuverability. So let's talk about, it's really important. So what do the pawns give us? So they could determine the space. They can determine open lines. So I did mention in passing the half open C file and the D file. So we could have open lines as in like open files. It could be open diagonals, open ranks, just areas to maneuver. So they give you space. Space is something you can use to maneuver, right? And you maneuver specifically along lines, right? So here, we're seeing the C file, again, half open C file, half open D file. The fact that the A pawn's moved, as I mentioned, the rook, it does allow the rook to lift up and come over, can swing across if it wants to. That's at least there, right? And then we have shelter, right? So they can give it, now that's what you were just talking about. So they can provide basically defense and offense, right? But very specifically, they can provide like a shell, kind of a shelter for the K, we'll say, for the king. So in this case, again, we have that kind of double-edged swords of the pawns pushing to be a pawn storm, to be the aggressors, and they're kind of leaving the monarch behind, right? But we do have two bishops, a rook and a queen, as you said. So the pieces, funny enough, you'll see a bishop sometimes here, and I'll call that kind of the replacement of the pawn, because the bishop acts like the pawn diagonally. It's just you'd rather lose a pawn than a bishop, but at least it covers your king a little bit. So we have a shelter for the king. What else can the pawns do for you? Well, they can serve as like spears or battering rams. So we have so basically we have kind of a front. They provide like a front to attack. And they also can determine weak squares, which are vital in order to, to hop into your opponent's territory, to invade. So they determine basically weaknesses. Now they could be weak pawns themselves. So let's say there's a weak square. A weak square is a square that cannot be defended by a pawn, basically by definition. So that's what I want to get at. That's another important feature of this position. That's the final thing, I think. Then we'll be down. We'll have it all down, I think. And then we'll look at the candidate. That's the Silman technique. I mean, it's not only Silman's, but Jeremy Silman, Silman, Silman. He talks about that, where you look at your imbalances, you figure out what's going on, and then you look at each candidate move, every option, and then you start calculating, oh, what if option A? What if option B? What do I expect, right? So one more thing, it would be weaknesses. Now, weak pawns and weak squares. So can you guys tell me a weakness on this board in a space that cannot be covered by another pawn ever again? Because that basically means the pieces are responsible for looking after them, not the pawns, and they don't want to have to do that. Now, if it's a weak square, a weak pawn residing on that square is naturally a weak pawn. It's weaker, and then there are different versions of weak pawns. We'll talk about how weak the pawn is, right? But the point is, if it's sitting on a weak square, well, can't be guarded by one of its friends, one of its pawn friends. So it's just going to become more vulnerable to attack. So yeah, I think those are the main elements that we'll see with pawns, and just the structure in general. It'll tell you where to play. It'll tell you, it'll give the pieces access to certain things. Maybe it's fixed in place, and so the pieces are locked up. Maybe it favors a knight over a bishop because the bishop is locked, has its diagonals locked. So it'll just tell us everything. That's like your map, right? So anyway, now that we're here, does that make sense? Do you guys have any questions about how these pawns come into play? Does that make sense, Christopher? I know you're just getting back into it again. Are you with me?
I'm liking what you've written down about pawn structure and the different things that applies to it: spacing, open lines, shelter, spears. And so, as a spear, it's both. You mentioned it's both defensive and offensive. That when it's a spear, that's when so you can use it either way.
Or it could be, I guess I view it like it could be a spear or maybe a shield, right? Depends how you use it, right? And you can see that. You can literally see that here. Now the shield has become extended a bit, right? Now black shield is very, it's close to his chest here, right? Now this spear, this shield is a little more extended. So I don't know. It's like, or it's like your shield and your, it's like your shield, holding up your shield and your gun. It could be, or your sword. What would that be, like kind of gladiator style or something like that, right?
Right.
So so that's your shield, and it's your spears coming forward. Is that pretty much covers it? Anything else you had there?
No, that's good. And then when you mentioned about how it can determine weakness, you're using it also for surveillance, just to determine what could happen,
right,
on the board. So I like the different analogies that they're using. So
the map kind of yes, I like that, because I didn't say that word specifically, but that's a great way of putting it. So it's do it like it's kind of like your map. So it's like or it's almost like your terrain, right? but then you have your radar, right? So, and well, the interesting thing now that I don't know, I'm going to be in there. The interesting thing now that you mentioned that is that I view like chess is a game of perfect information, right? All the intel is out there, right? You just have to know how to decode it. You have to know how to decipher it, right? But everything is in front of us, right? So it's not like Battleship. we have to we might have some part like fog of war. Now there's a version of chess, there are very many variants just for fun. In fog of war, you can't see the opponent's half of the board, but if you can aim into it, well, for the most part, but if you aim in there, you can start to see it. It's like you're shining a flashlight in there, or if you could take something, you can see it. So you kind of deduce where things have been. But in chess, you don't have to deduce in terms of where anything is. It's all right in front of you. But you got, but it's still incredibly difficult, right? What do you do? How do you decipher that? How do you figure out what your opponent's trying to do? How do you come up with plans based on the unique structure and piece placement, right? All that. But yeah, pawn's the soul of chess. That's going to determine all this stuff and probably a little more than this. But I think this is kind of the gist of it. Okay. So given all that, oh, one more thing though, yeah, is the squares. So, and Leah, you mentioned the lack of access to squares because they control squares. So I said weak squares, but they could also be, well, strong squares or just squares that you don't have access to, right? So because of this, and because of these pawn pushes, they give white more squares to use and actually black fewer squares. It's a kind of a zero-sum game in that sense for the most part when we use it as purely territory. But of course, you can get around their territory. So it's not that simple, right? We can call it kind of getting behind the facade of that Western movie set, right? Just because it looks it looks imposing, but once you get it, when you just see the set behind all that, right? And you get to some camera crew and all that stuff, right? Then when you get to the what do you call it? Like when you break down the fourth wall, and you say, oh wait, that's actually, I shouldn't be scared after all, right? This isn't real. But you can, if you get around that, that's very important for this position actually, because we have to get in there to get counterplay, right? So anyway, we can use plenty of analogies to describe it. So anyway, white's gaining space, black has less space. The more white's pawns push, well, the more space white gets, the more black gets squeezed. And obviously we're playing with black and we're not gonna let that happen forever, right? We have to punch back. And that's why we're talking about counterplay. And anyway, the last thing, squares. So where would you say the weak squares are? If we look at white's position, what are the squares that cannot be defended by a pawn? They might be covered, but if you imagine if you just remove the pieces bare bones, which one, Matt, cannot be defended by a pawn ever again?
Well, E3 and F3.
Right. We have bishops. It looks very nicely covered, but there are those are weak squares though, fundamentally. E3. I'll make X's where their weak squares are, and ours too. So we have, where did my X go? There it is. All right, so E3, F3. Well, those can no longer be guarded by pawns. Now the pawns used to guard them, but they decided to push and they took a risk in doing so. It's a double-edged sword, right? Okay, what else? I mean, fundamentally, we can say, if you think about it, all of the first and second rank are weak, but we don't, that's kind of redundant because we know from the beginning, but those can never be covered by pawns. That's why we say, like the F pawn, the F7 pawn, well, the king castled, then the rook is there now, right? But fundamentally, everything on your first and second rank is like, I guess, targetable. That can be targeted. But beyond that, usually we talk about beyond that, but we just kind of know. Can we access it? No, that's another thing. Is it weak? 1 and 2, can you access it? So we'll figure that out next. Okay, well, what else? Beyond the first and second rank, are there any other weak points in white's position? Let's look at the third. Now, Matt, you noticed the ones, actually not all of them, on the third rank. There is one more in the third rank that's weak. What's that?
H3.
Correct. H3 is weak. Well, this is important because whenever you put, I think the G and the H pawns are the weakest ones to put. Let me get rid of all those bottom X's though. There's a lot that's just going to be confusing. Hold on. We'll focus. So kind of a given, just keep that in mind. It's kind of, no one really said it to me because it's pretty obvious, but when you think about it, first and second rank are just fundamentally weak. Well, it's deep in the enemy territory and the pawns have a very difficult time covering that. Now, when we go beyond that to the third rank, so the only ones that can't be covered by pawns are the ones that Matt pointed out. So when you move that G pawn, you've immediately given up control of H3 and F3. Now, the reason why that's so weak is because there's no I pawn. There's not another pawn over here that could, pick up the slack for the G pawn having moved, right? So this this is weak. Now, if you move the G pawn, okay, that used to be covered by the E pawn, perhaps. Well, that decided to move early. But if that's there, it can theoretically cover it. But this guy played E4 probably on move 1, G4. So he's got all these weak spots. Now the pawns have moved. Okay, they've left these weaknesses on 3rd. And how about the 4th rank where the pawns are? Are there any weak points there? Any of those, well, effectively any of those pawns or squares that cannot be guarded by a pawn ever again? What do you guys
Well,
think?
again, E and F and H.
It's the same thing, right? Because that pawn on G4 is pushed and the pawn on E4 is pushed, the E4 pawn, E and F, we'll get to the E4 pawn, I just gave it away. But yeah, E and F, well, naturally, and also then that. So we have H4, F4, and E4. So those 3 can't be guarded by pawns, right? There's a pawn there, but that pawn cannot be guarded. You can't move the F pawn back to cover it. Okay, so it's those. Anything else? I think everything else could be covered by a pawn, right? Because you could move up the C and B1 square to cover anything else on the 4. Now, then another thing is it currently accessible? Well, for example, C5 and even C4, the queen's there, maybe B4. So like C5 is definitely accessible, but technically, anyway, now we're getting really deep into weaknesses. We can even have a class on that, but technically, yeah, B4 could be played to attack that, but then C3 would be weakened. So you see, it's like you can't cover everything forever, right? So it's like I said, it begins with the weakness on the 1st and 2nd rank. Well, you're going to move those pawns up to cover something else. But when you do that, you weaken something behind it, right? So that's a perfect example of that, where if white chooses to cover C4 or C5, well, then the knight would be hanging, right? Because he loses protection of the knight. So you can see, anyway, you can see everything's interconnected, but really you're starting to see how pawns are the soul of chess. So if you hadn't already seen it, you're really starting to see how important those pawns are. But yeah, and as I mentioned, E4. So really we have 2 pawns that are weak. Now the G4 pawn, that's fine because white can play H3 and buttress that pawn, right? But these 2, those guys, because they can't be guarded by another pawn, those are in the center, those are very important to look at, right? Now the knight here, that can be covered by the C pawn, and it's already covered and it's not attacked. So probably the D4 knight's okay. But yeah, definitely let's keep that in mind. So now that we've begun to decode the position, so when you look at this position, you probably see it. You should be seeing this in a different way from when we started, right? From the first time you glanced at this position. So now do you feel like you're becoming kind of intimately aware, intimately connected with the position, right? You have well, if you've been playing the game for like half an hour or an hour, this position. Now, funny enough, you might have gotten tunnel vision by now, because in terms of your surveillance, maybe you were focused so much on, I don't know, this over here, that you forgot. If you look at it with fresh eyes, you're like, oh, wait, maybe this is really important, or maybe this, you know what I mean? So when we look at it with fresh eyes, it's actually maybe even better. And if you're playing a game, you should step away and drink some water or something and come back and look at it with fresh eyes. But anyway, but if you do a thorough assessment, thorough analysis, we're basically surveilling, I like that, surveillance, we're surveilling that kind of map, figuring out what's going on, look at the, imbalances, all the differences, then then should we even judge it or start to come up with plans and then specific moves. So, because when the moment you start judging, some of my students do this, they look at even a specific line of play they're looking at. They say, oh, no, that doesn't work. They're judging it as being bad right away. Well, then you're going to discard something, right? Maybe too early, right? So we don't even need to judge anything yet. Okay, but now we see what's going on. I mean, it's not really judgment to say it's a weakness. Well, if it can't be guarded, we're just saying objectively it's a weakness. Now the question is, how weak is it? How accessible is it? But anyway, we've got all these elements of pawns and all those things. Basically, all those things tell us the imbalances, other than pretty much getting into the context of it, Leah, like you mentioned, the 4th rank, and 5th rank rather. It was the 5th rank, and the fact, and then we talk about piece placement with which is you know, kind of with respect to pawn structure. But Leia, like you talked about the centralized pieces. So you can have this pawn structure. The pieces can choose to be here and here or something, but they are very centralized for white. Now let's talk about potential for black. Well, black is very compact. And look at that bishop. For example, the bishop only has one retreat square. That's it. This one has one retreat square. He can go get taken here, get taken here. And here it gets traded. But the other thing is, okay, now we talk about the last thing was that we talked about was weaknesses, right? So those weak pawns. I want us to think about those pawns, and that may be part of our attacking plan again. So the key thing here is that white has chosen to use those spears, push them forward, but in doing so, it's kind of weakened. Hold on a second. Oh, you want me to eat your cereal for you? All right, thank you. Now I have some cereal. Awesome. All right, so let's see. Now we have for the video. Let's see. So yeah, this is very important, these weak squares, because if we don't have some weak squares to exploit, well, then they're just going to do whatever they want to us, right? So we gotta pick those apart. So now let's actually look at specific moves. So again, going back to the beginning, we wanted to look at what is white going to do, because we know we're going to counterattack, and we know that white's brewing up something over here. Well, Matt, you did say a pawn storm. I think you guys may have touched on that. So white's trying to do a pawn storm. In doing so, they've weakened themselves, right? So we have to take advantage of that. But currently, if it's white's move, well, Leia, you mentioned a move so far. You mentioned f5. So that's one of the kind of battering ram or spear moves that we can do, like kind of shove our pawn forward, use it like a battering ram. Any other candidate moves for white? Any other options? Then we'll actually break them down. But if you had white, what else would you look at here?
I'd look at G5.
G5 is pretty annoying, right? The knight will be under attack, trying to win the knight. I mean, in that vein, I guess E5, right? So all three of those pawn pushes are all launching. Well, they'd be the first ones to invade enemy territory, right? If we look at it along the fourth to fifth rank, that line. Yep, so we have three pawn pushes. I mean, is there anything else that white can do? I don't see much else. I mean, white could kind of slowly maneuver if they want to try to, like, I don't know, get a piece, like get a rook over here. That would take a while, you know. I mean, you can imagine if the rook reaches here, there could be a target on h7 for sure. You have to be careful about that. Okay, so which one do you want to look at first? What do you think will be the most concerning? Well, Leia, did you pretty much dismiss this move? F5?
I think, okay, I think what I was looking at before is that white plays f5, black takes back with the e pawn, and then maybe white plays knight f5, and then maybe they could then hop to e7.
Yeah, no, actually, there's something there. I think that if they, you know, if we're playing as black, if we choose to take, right, then let's just say hypothetically, oh, it is black's move though, but we're thinking about what white might do. So if f5, they are looking at that e pawn. Well, I suppose there could be a bypass, right? If white pushes, black can bypass and then kick the knight. Not ideal, but you know, at least the knight can't come in after probably retreat if you don't want to lose the knight. Slows them down. But hey, those pawns are coming. We got to be careful. But so that is certainly an option for white. Yeah. E5 probably less palatable because E5 is, you know, well, first of all, they start trading off the pieces, trading off the bishop. I don't know if it favors white, but also, are they just losing that pawn on E5? If you imagine them pushing, black has a lot of coverage there. See how those pieces look through the, you know, queen looks through the pawn, knight covers as well. So black has 1, 2, 3 covering that pawn, that square. And white would only have a pawn covering. So I think black would just take it comfortably, right?
That's why I was thinking that maybe G5 might be better.
Yeah, by process of elimination, maybe we're at G5 as of the three. I mean, because really there's nothing else aggressive, really. I mean, there's that. I guess you can take or bypass. Nothing huge going on there, but these are the three moves to think about, those pushes. So by process of elimination, we're at G5. Now G5 has a little less, tails a little less risk. It's just, okay, I'm already guarded by a pawn and I'm attacking a knight. Pretty annoying. So, and if that were to happen, where would the knight need to go?
He's got to go back to E8, doesn't he?
You'd have to go back to E8, which is not that fun. That's not much fun. Now, this is a, it's counterplay. It's like thinking a few moves ahead, because this is one where white's not going to win on the spot, but we don't want them to build up a really dangerous attack. I mean, they do want to target H7. So for example, now you really might see something where the pieces start shifting to H3. It might have just an all-out pawn storm, but also, like I said, maybe somehow, maybe the queen comes over here and, you start aiming at here. Maybe the rook would have to lift. But the point is, if you don't do anything, you're just going to keep getting kind of punked around, right? And start pushing you back. I mean, certainly G5, even a G5, there's some G6 stuff in the air too. Maybe H4, H5, G. Imagine this pawn were to get here. You see this E6 square, how it's guarded by the F pawn. What if white, just hypotheticals, but what if white smashes through here and induces black to take? Well, if this pawn is to take, then white can actually make use of that knight and take this pawn. So we see that white has some pretty pretty vicious things they can do if we're not careful. So we want to obviously nip that in the bud and stop it before it even really starts, right? So here it is, black to move. So in other words, we're fighting for the initiative, we're fighting for control, and we're not going to give our opponent those things that they want, right? So now that we know some moves that if we were to pass the move on to white, we know what they might do. So it's black to move. Now we look at some kind of counterattacking moves. And again, keep in mind, we're very compact, but we're also solid. We kind of have springiness to the position. And I did mention one other imbalance with the pawns that could favor black in terms of the center. And this is, again, typical. And so we're looking at kind of a typical scenario that you might see in a Sicilian defense with this E4, C5 stuff. You'll see this a lot. Okay, so what are some options for black now? What are some candidate moves that would... Now, anytime you're looking at candidate moves, you do want to look at your most forcing moves first, which are checks and then captures and then threats. So we don't even have any check. This is not going to be this is not a combo puzzle necessarily. It's not a puzzle of like, oh, you just go ahead and do something and like win a piece or like checkmate them. It's not like that. This is a strategic puzzle, right? So there's no check or super forcing move. There are captures. There are captures to think about. You certainly have to look at those. And threats, there's maybe E5 is a threat. Okay, so yeah, there are two threats you can make. There's some pawn moves that can threaten things. There are knight captures. We have to look at those. That's actually the most forcing move. Well, this one just looks like a probably no-go, but you can look at it, as well as this one or this one. So we have options to take a pawn, and we can make threats with pawns. Oh, and there's knight C5. Remember, I mentioned that move. So we have quite a few moves to think about. We have the captures, and we have, you tell me any pawn moves, you see. Knight C5 is that, well, that's literally, we talked about, that's the only square that we can use to advance really with the piece. And when you do that, well, what's the benefit of this move?
An outpost.
I think I got rid of this black background over here. So I'll just get rid of all that over here. And I'll go back. Let's go back to our board. So we'd have an outpost for the knight.
Yes.
Could be, at least for now. Yeah, it could get kicked technically, but again, that would come with its risks. And what would it be? It's a nice place for now. And what would it be attacking? Putting more pressure on.
A4.
Which one?
A4.
Well, it is A4, and what else?
E4.
Right. So if we envision the knight coming here, well, we can't move it yet if we're anticipating, right? Trying to see in your head. If we envision the knight coming here, we would look at A4 and E4. Well, A4 is guarded twice. We wouldn't take that. But e4 is, that's the weak pawn, right? That's the one that can't be guarded by pawns. So the piece, and again, that's where the bishop's kind of almost acting like a pawn, maybe to cover the king, or just like a pawn that needs to kind of, I call babysitting another pawn. So something, the pawn is destined to, the piece is destined for other things than just sitting there. Now the pawns could be great too, but still, if the pawn's hanging out anyway, it's like, hey, I may as well like a4, or I may as well play b3 and guard him or something in some cases. But the bishop, the point is bishop's like just acting as a defender there. So we bring in another knight. Now we have 2 knights and a bishop. We have 3 attackers, and you only have 2 defenders. So knight c5 is certainly one way to strike at the pawn. That's definitely worth looking at. And and then we have the other 2 moves. Well, we have knight takes pawn. Is that going to work? That's our most forcing move, just to say, hey, if you don't take me back, I'm just going to win a pawn. Does that work though, or no?
No.
Because
the knight takes pawn that is being attacked onto by bishop and a knight. So they, whereas you only have the bishop to defend,
right.
so you lose out.
Right, we would lose that, right? So if we take that, oops. I just attempted the puzzle and I got it wrong, I guess. Okay. So it says wrong and go back or something. But yeah, because I set it up like a puzzle in this study. I can send it to you guys. But knight takes. Now they would take back with let's say the bishop and trade it off. But basically we would be giving up our knight for the pawn. We're giving up the knight and the bishop for the knight and the pawn. So basically we're losing a knight for a pawn ultimately. Let's see. Now I have these arrows showing. I guess it gave some hints now. Can I get rid of those arrows? Let me refresh it. Okay, no, the arrows are just with us. Okay. Well, no, I think it's showing threats or something. I think it's saying like, oh, well, if you play d5, you would threaten that more or something like that. I don't know if I can get rid of that. But at any rate, that doesn't work yet. So now e5 is interesting to strike back. But if you imagine going e5, that actually would give up some weaknesses too. What weaknesses, what would we give up by playing e5? I'll just put it there. Why would that be bad? So let's say the knight, they could take it, or what else can the knight do? You guys see, Christopher, are you thinking about the access that I'm not going to pick on you today, but just if you think about but if you think about access for that knight, think about where it could go now safely, that where it wasn't able to previously go after e5. What do you guys think? Anywhere it can go? How about f5? Right.
Yes.
So it's able to utilize that. Yeah, you saw it later. Yeah, it's able to utilize f5 now. It's pretty annoying. Not to mention, see, this used to be covered d5. When you go, okay, I just gave you guys the answer, but we'll figure it out. We're here. We're at the answer. Okay, we'll talk about why. But anyway, we're pretty much through process of elimination. We're getting there, but we got to know why. So e5, it also gives that d5 square up. So it used to be covered by a pawn. Again, we have very solid defense. But again, once you start moving those pawns, they're really, they're really opening up your position. So we would effectively be gripping gripping the dark squares, but weakening the light squares. We want to cover both light squares and dark squares. But the moment you go e5, those light squares become super weak. So you see the knight coming in here later, you see that one, and the knight comes in with tempo, with gain of time against the bishop. So we don't like that one. So yeah, the answer is d5. Let's see, is it gonna? Okay, it's not gonna. It can stay there with an exclamation mark. Good move. So we can analyze from this point. Now d5 is the move. Well, we do see there's the weakness, and again, we've analyzed that we can't take it yet. So we have 2 attackers. They have 2 defenders, right? We would need more force on it. But we do notice that's a weak point that we can access. Keep in mind too, that knight c5 move, that would bear down on it more. So I suppose that was an option, but this is more forceful, a little more direct. and we start blasting the position open when we strike at the center. They say, have you guys heard this one? The best response to an attack on the flank is a what?
Attack in the center.
Right. Well, actually, I wrote that there, in the notes. Counter thrust. Now, this is very common in a Sicilian that you will see this D5. So it's thematic. You just have to figure out if it works or not and when. The best reaction to an attack on the flank is almost, to be fair, almost always a counterattack in the center. Could be an opposite side counterattack too. So anyway, and that's also Sicilian. White often goes queen side and black often castles king side. And you know, white goes all out at the black king, and then black does the opposite. So anyway, D5. Now we're really putting pressure there, threatening to take the pawn. And the pawn is pushed. Now, if the pawn takes the pawn, then we simply take back with the knight, and we start liquid. I'd say probably it would be knight takes, we start liquidating the pieces. And when we liquidate the pieces, and we were looking at this one, right? When they liquidate, it pretty much should diminish a lot of the attacking potential. Let me see. You can even check to see what the computer would thinks of this one. If you were to take, and see it says over here, you see this bar, that means up for black, meaning it likes black's position. And yeah, and you can see basically what it's saying is D5, it thinks it's around even. That's how the computer thinks, plus 0.1. So you can see it's around hovering even. Anyway, now there's a ton of errors. That's confusing. But yeah, it likes this, and it says this is just not good. We would have knight takes, bishop takes, pawn takes, but we've created all sorts of, one, we have a ton of counterplay. Two, we've traded down pieces. We've gotten into some attackers. And three, we have an open line. So we could suddenly use this line right away and then move our bishop and unleash our rook. So we have counterplay. We're going to grab their attention. Here comes the knight next. Knight's going to start hopping in. So you see the merits of playing D5. That's if he were. So we would have to calculate, get rid of these arrows. There we go. Okay, good. I changed the settings. Those arrows are so annoying. Okay, so when we play this move D5, it clearly makes a lot of sense. You know, we realize we're under attack and we have to do something or perish basically, or at least passively defend and then probably perish. So D5 puts immediate pressure on E4. And you see that we're going to look at pushing, that's actually what happened in the game. But we also have to know if they take, well, we've looked at that line. So we would have to do that analysis in our head before committing to D5 with the what ifs. What if he takes? What if he pushes? Oh, and what if he plays G5? Well, that's one of the key things that this is directly. Hold on one second. And that's on 1 second. So think about what would happen if G5. Just heading out. Okay, so what do you guys think? What would you do now? Well, we've played D5. We've announced our intentions, where we're striking. Let's see. Oh, Matt, I see in the chat that you wrote F5. That was where? Oh, was that the knight? Was that the knight move, Matt?
That was a while ago. Yeah.
That was the knight move, like in reaction to E5 or something, right?
Yeah.
Okay. So as for G5, well, we've announced our intentions with D5. We're attacking E4. So the question is, now can we take E4? Maybe even with the pawn, but probably with the knight. Can we comfortably take it now? And look at that evaluation. I mean, since I happened to press that, so we have the little, that's a whole other element of chess, Christopher. You probably, I don't know if you watched videos and stuff, you see this computer analysis, of course, these days, right? And people cheating and all that using computers. But so you click on that little button and you open Pandora's box, right? And now you get all these calculations going. And we have Knight takes e4. Oh, funny enough, it's actually looking at both and saying the evaluation is about the same. So now it says minus 1.2. So in other words, it thinks that black's position is worth about a pawn more. Well, that's because black is winning a pawn. But let's say you win a pawn and you have a much better position. It might be like, oh, it's worth 2 pawns more. Something like that, because it thinks in zeros and ones, right? So anyway, but you'll see, but effectively what it's doing, the shortcut is you look at this bar and you can see that it's going up like a point for black. So anyway, it's happy with black's position. We should be happy with it as humans, as thinking humans, we should be happy as well. But to justify it, we would see, well, we're striking at that pawn, we're breaking up their attacking front to a large degree, and we're just distracting them. We're bubbleizing our pieces, we're distracting them. So again, it says either one, that's what I was saying, right? So we could simply take with the knight, but it's much better now because we have our pawn there. And if the knight takes, we take back with tempo, again, gaining time. The bishop would have to move. Yep, Christopher, I see you got this. You're back in the game, right? You're following. Yeah, I mean, I know you have a great mind for it. So once it's in front of you, you just soak it up.
Little by little.
Yeah, it comes back. Okay, so yeah, this is just bad for them. I mean, you're getting your pawn back. Oh, you know what? Actually, interestingly enough, if this were to go back, then I might think about going after a more like e5. I mean, I'm not stopping there. Actually, never mind. Then they have knight f5. But yeah, but I'd be going for that too. I'd be trying to make that happen. Computer, okay, since we're going to be boring and look at the computer, actually says g6 because that'll just shut down their attack. But you can see that now you would just take. So you can see that by punching a hole in their center, interestingly, that e pawn was part of the front, like you were looking at earlier, Leia, f5. That e pawn, although it's a central pawn, it is critical in helping white to launch their attack, and we're seeing that right there as an example of where the absence of that pawn doesn't allow them to support the pawn push. You would just take it and win another pawn, right? So it doesn't allow them to do that. It just punches holes in their position and slows them down, right? They lose their kind of mobility, that fluidity of their position. So d5 is really a disruptive move, right? We're being a disruptor now with d5. What else do they have? Really, it's you're threatening to take. So either take or push. That's about it. So in the game, after Rogozin, there's an opening named after him. You guys may have heard of Rogozin defense. Fisher actually liked that one. Rogozin and Botvinnik was they call the quote father of the Soviet school, and he lost the title twice, and so he got it back each time. So he was 3-time champion, a world champion. So yeah, some pretty strong players here. So d5. Now Botvinnik went for e5. Well, where does the knight naturally go? We've already played d5. We've gotten our foothold in the center. So where do you guys think that knight should go? What would you guys, if this were a blitz game, a quick game, you guys had to make a gut decision, where would you go with your knight? What will be the follow through with the d5? Okay, well, you want to keep springing in, keep springing forth. What do you do?
e4.
Yeah, you got to move your knight. I mean, you don't want to give away your knight for free for a pawn. So you go into e4. This is actually, yeah, we are actually, I think, following the real game. This is what happened. So knight e4. Now the rest kind of, whatever happens in a sense. Like you know though that you're guarded twice. Remember that bishop looks through the pawn. So we have really nice square control, right? So effectively, what have we done? You look at this position, you say, okay, this is a quote weak square, and it's not like the weakest pawn on it. Sometimes the pawns are totally isolated or doubled or whatever, and they're even weaker. But it is technically pretty weak. It's a weak-ish pawn, let's say. Not the weakest, but it is vulnerable to attack. It can't be defended by another pawn. So we start punching at it. And ultimately, once we come in, that's our square now. So we've turned their weakness into our actually our square that we occupy, that we can control, right? So battle for territory. So this is an interesting moment where black is, or white is pushed into our territory, but we've actually come right around it. And because we've asserted ourselves in the center. And again, so we're really reinforcing this concept of counterattacking in the center in response to the flank attack. And we want to try to embarrass them and say, oh, what are you doing there? What was this all for? You've just kind of denuded the king, right? The emperor has no clothes now, right? Well, once we get a little deeper and we've traded everything down, that guy's just going to be just out there, and hopefully we can have a few pieces left. We haven't traded everything off. Then we could be the attackers, right? So knight takes, pawn takes. That's what happened. The bishop retreated, and the bishop went to d5. So bishop going to d5 is very logical. It centralizes, but it comes to the middle with a threat. Where does the bishop want to go next? Where are we aiming? Where are the connections between the pieces?
So he wants to go to c4 and skewer the queen.
See a skewer there? Well, the rook's worth, fundamentally, generally speaking, the rook's worth more than the bishop, right? 5 points versus 3 points. So if we go, roughly speaking, right, just to get a sense relatively, which one's stronger. So if we get our bishop on c4, the queen's going to have to move and we take the rook, skewer. So in a pin is where, Christopher, just to review, the pin is where the weaker piece is in front of the stronger piece. The skewer is where the strong is in front of the weaker. In any case, I view it kind of like a shish kebab, right? It's like going through, the pin is going through like the two pieces of, or in that case, food, or in this case, eating pieces, basically, but you're going through the pieces, right? So in this case, the stronger piece is the skewer, the strongest piece. Like often the king will have to move out of the way, then you take a rook behind it or something. So that's a nice tactic. What does he do? He simply moves the rook. But you see suddenly, look at that. This is a great example. Look what's just happened. He's played rook f to c1. So he went from an attacking position where he had this mobility of his pawns. We have gotten a pawn in the center. We've got our bishop in the center. We've got the bishop retreating. And we have their rook kind of retreating to go away from the king. Remember, we were a little worried about maybe the rook kind of lifting or something, or doing some stuff over here near our king. Well, now there's no one near our king. Well, we don't have, keep in mind that we don't have any defenders either other than the pawns. We got to be a little careful. But that's partially why we had to punch back so hard. And his kicking our knight out takes away one more defender. So we do have to be careful, but that's why we really need to get his attention. So we threaten bishop c4, but that's great. We pull him away from the center. And then where are we? We are on simply rook ac8. Logical. Oh, that's funny. So, the computer likes g5. The computer is ready to just punch back. The computer, I'm looking at the computer, but it's interesting because I've done this one. I had a cool game like this once where I got to do this only one time in tournament play, because the idea there, but it's a pattern. You do this, then when they take, you get to win the central pawn. So at this time, it's weird. It's like a wing thrust, but to get to the center, but that's a little risky, but it's interesting. Anyway, the human went rook ac8. Okay, white goes bishop to f2. So that's great. We like that. They keep retreating their pieces. They're retreating and they're defending. Hey, I mean, like I said, half open C file, and you see that's coming into play. So we're putting pressure on him here. We've got that d5, originally the d5 push gave us the access to d5. And now we need more pieces in the game. How about our knight? Where can he go? Well, that's the square we talked about. What was it? Where would you go with that knight? Well, there's only one good place. And unless you're going to sacrifice. Actually, I mean, you probably would look at the sacrifice. You should look at it. Probably not necessary or enough here, but what else would it be, Matt?
c5.
C5, yeah, that's where we spring forward to. Yeah, I mean, you could look at the sacrifice, takes, and takes. You would be parting with an entire knight for 2 pawns. Then they can like go after your queen. Probably not worth it. You might want to look at it, but it turns out this is the way to go. Knight c5. Look at those pieces. Now we have 2 pieces on the 5th rank, or 4 up for us. As for them, they only have 1 piece that's 4 up. So, the same square relatively, right? So we actually have more piece activity than they do now. And we have our rook and queen on the C file. Theirs is on the C file, but it's behind the pawn. It's looking basically at a wall. And yeah, but basically this is the main puzzle. that the computer says he's even, that's fine, but he has a lot of play. The point is he has effectively distracted Botvinnik from his kingside, from his dangerous kingside attack. So that's the main goal. And then it's up to him now to do other things. And he does. Yeah, and he definitely does. By the way, there's a psychological element there, right? After having stopped his attack, he's deflated now, right? So he's like, look, he's all dressed up with nowhere to go, right? Look at this. Again, those pawns could become weaknesses. So he's like, oh, I thought I was going to get you, and now suddenly hit me hard in the center. You start pummeling your opponent, and you get the initiative, and it certainly has a psychological. For most people, I think it would have a psychological effect, right? So then he lashes out with b4, and you see, look at the evaluation. That's exactly what happened. Look at this. See, it goes up for black now because he made an inaccurate move. Because he was just lashing out. Actually, it's funny. I played a grandmaster from India once at the World Open. He did the exact same thing to me, but in his case, it actually worked. So, but it's interesting because it did weaken his squares a little bit. And I could have actually had a decent position. Like it could have been all right. He would have still been fine too. But I misplayed it a little bit, and then of course once he got going, he just took over the game. But I remember he did again these patterns, right? Same thing, the G5 pattern, the B4 pattern, the D5 counter strike. So you'll see these motifs, the C file pressure, things like that. You'll see how these motifs, they just play out in unique ways, of course, but you have the motifs in your mind, the more experience you get. So what does he do? Well, now he does a brilliant move to exploit this. Well, now, where do you think this knight goes? This is kind of where everything comes to fruition. But again, the main concept is we get our counterplay, we kill his attack, we have a good game. But now that we're here, this is just kind of for fun to see the crescendo here. What do we do? Where would you move that knight?
Back to D7.
Interesting candidate moves. Back to D7. That's no fun. I mean, it's not terrible if you go back.
Well, otherwise you got to sacrifice.
We want to do something more exciting, and now it's time for some exciting stuff. To really, it's a tactical flourish. What do you think it is?
Oh.
That's the hint over here.
Okay.
Wait, hold on. Let me.
D3.
D3. Mm-hmm. Yes, that's the little the hint I give over here. See, we have these lines and say. See, so we have the analysis here. So that's the stuff that we already saw. Apply the pressure on the C file, influence of the steed. So you distracted him, and now we have the tactical flourish, and that is knight D3. And that's I'll block out the rest just so you don't see it yet. But now this is crazy. You're like, wait, I'm just hanging my knight to the pawn. Yes, you can take the rook, but it's not that clear. Because generally speaking, if you take a rook with the queen and you get a second one, well, that's 5 and 5 for 9. So you'd be getting 10 for 9. But the problem is we're also giving up our knight. So we see this, they take our knight. So we're getting both rooks for a queen. So just to review, Christopher, we have, yes, the pawns are 1, knights and bishops are both viewed as about 3 points. Rook is 5, queen is 9. So if you get 2 rooks, I mean, and you will often see that those 2 rooks do pay off. Because you have 2, I mean, it's like a knight and a bishop versus a rook. Well, knight and bishop, 3 and 3, 6 for 5. And you'll see them, they can just overwhelm the rook. Power in numbers, right? If you have a front of a bunch of pawns, you see power in numbers. So we have 2 rooks against a queen. But we've also given away a knight. That's the problem. So take, but he has a solution here. So bishop f1. Did I end it there? I think it ends there, actually. I mean, it kept going. We can take a look at it. But basically, it's really brilliant because, so this is the natural conclusion of his play, though. He wants to get his victory after such brilliant play. So knight drops on d3, just drops a bomb on d3, right? He drops a truth bomb. So after pawn takes, queen takes c1 check, rook takes back. So when you look at it materially, I mean, again, this is beyond the main, this is beyond the main idea. The main idea is just seeing how we, understanding the position in front of us. Very importantly, sensing the danger. Because if you don't sense danger, you don't know that you need to counterattack. Sometimes more than others, but we sensed the danger. We knew what white wanted to do, so we really broke it down. But again, if we were playing in a tournament, we had maybe 45 or an hour on the clock. We should do all those things, and it might be our opponent's move. They say think about the big ideas when it's your opponent's move, and the specifics when it's your move, roughly speaking. But we would have done all that. Certainly, we should have done all that. So we really talked about breaking it down, and we talked about how to get your counterplay, distract your opponent. So in other words, his attack fizzled out, and we like that. That's what we want. Now that we're here, and then it came to a point where we're like, okay, this is cool. This is now no, but look, this is the culmination of our counterattack. So it is good to know. Oh well, I've gotten so far. I'm here. May as well know how to finish him off, right? How to turn this in my favor decisively and score the full point. So yeah, this is just the finishing phase of it. But I want you guys to mostly know the first part. But this is really cool. So pawn takes knight, queen takes, rook takes back. Okay, so well, we can cancel. The easiest way to see how many pieces are on the board, well, you can just remember what was taken. But the easiest way, I think you don't need to count everything up, just cancel out, right? We both have two bishops. So just think in your mind, you see bishops are wiped out. And I have two rooks for a queen and a knight. And let's count the pawns. We got 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, and they've got 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. Yeah, we both have 7 pawns, right? Both missing 1. So, but basically we have 2 rooks for a queen and a knight. So that's actually 12 for 10. So we'd be down 2 points there, but well, my final statement on that is that the counterattack was decisive. So I guess I feel like Silman does that sometimes too, where because he wants to show the main idea. And then sometimes he'll just say, oh, and then Black went on to win in 15 moves or 20 moves or something. But no, we'll actually look at that now that we're here, we'll understand why, of course. And people often use the computers to tell them that. We'll try not to. So let's see. So we double up. We have so much power coming through. The question is, can we actually get more material here? That's ultimately what it comes down to, because even though, like I said, there's 9 and 3 for the 10. So we're down like what? We're down really 9. Oh no, it would be 12 for 10. So we're down like 2 points technically if we're going to add them up. But here's the thing. We're actually going to be able to get a piece back. In which case, well, if we get 3, then we're the ones, then we would have our 13 against 12. I mean, again, roughly speaking. So the question is, can we win another piece? Well, let's give white, I don't know, a random move, like a sample of what can happen. Perhaps they'd have, oh, that's pretty annoying, actually. That's one of the more annoying moves. We could look at that later. But I don't know. Just give them a random move first, like this. So it'd be pretty direct that we could just take the pawn. And if the queen doesn't do anything, we're going to keep ramming the pawn down and get a queen. So let's say she takes it. Now, what will we do here? Actually, Matt, this is going back to an earlier motif that you found. It's just a different iteration of it. So what do? We have the 2 rooks doing a pretty good job. The bishop, this bishop can obviously take. Look at that. The scope is increased for everything. Look at that, because we blasted open everything. Wide open, very tactical situation. The terrain is blown open though, right? So what can we do with our bishop?
They're skewering the queen again.
Yeah. And this time, so previously she was going to move out of the way and we would have taken the rook. Now we're going to take a bishop, but the whole bishop. Previously it was like we would have taken, remember the rook was there, they would have taken us back. Now we got a bishop and a rook. So effectively we would do this and she can't cover. I don't think she wants to take. Well, then we're the ones who are ahead. We have 2 rooks and a bishop, or 2 bishops and a knight. That's 3, 3, and 3. That's 5, 5, and 3. But you will certainly see the power of the rooks there. The rooks are invading. They're picking off pawns. They're going to double up and break through and win stuff. So that's bad. Yeah. You're up like 2 rooks for a knight and a bishop. It's too much. So anyway, and if she moves away, let's just give her like a reasonable place to move to. Then rook takes with check. King wins. Right, so that is your skewer, because you're looking through, and then once she moves away, it's the 2 against 1 deal. We're ganging up on that bishop, right? So we have 2 against the bishop, and only the king guards, so he has to leave. And now look at effectively he's going to be winning that bishop. So that's kind of, sometimes you'll see that, again, the computer evaluation is very high. Like, why is it like that? Well, the computer already looked like 5 or 10 or 20 moves ahead. So now we see that final position, and we say, well, that looks great. We have bishop, bishop for knight, bishop. and then we have rook and rook for queen. So effectively, we did end up with the 2 rooks for the queen, because remember, we coughed up our knight on d3. We did a brilliant sacrifice, and we got the 2 rooks, but ultimately we did get a minor piece back, knight and bishop. We did get a minor piece, which is the bishop. We get that back, and then we end up with, as we were aiming for, we get our 2 rooks for queen, and now we have 3, 4, 5, 6. We have 6 pawns for 6. So technically we're up a point, but we're in their territory. And by the way, we're about to go bishop here and try to checkmate them in the corner with the assistance of the bishop. So we have this intersection of pieces, right? Not to mention, we're also probably going to pick off these pawns. So the kind of laborious way of going about it would be to eat the pawns and march your pawns down the board. Like after 20 more moves, maybe we get a new queen, or they have to give up pieces to stop us from queening. But I don't think we need to do that, because I think we're going to go here. We might checkmate them this way, or we might use the assistance of our other rook. And if you ever need to, you can make a little air for your king, the Luft. But I don't see any way that white's accessing the territory. But again, this is a sample line. This just gives you an idea. And you can, again, we can verify with the computer. See, computer saying -2, as if black is up 2 pawns, even though black is the one down right now. But yeah, certainly this is the move. But see, the computer, I was looking at, well, what if one sample line was, oh, what if they take? Well, then this is probably even worse. Look at that. Oh, you know, it's even finding a better move for us. This is fine. That's the second best move. It says -3. It really likes this move. Well, I think it's just a better version. What do we do when it runs away? Yeah, the computer's like, oh, I don't need to take your bishop because I see farther ahead. And I know that this is also going to work. And then it finds, let's see what it even finds. I'm curious. Wait, what? It's just, oh, duh, because it wants to checkmate in the corner. That's actually not that hard to see. But we can probably find that too. But still, the tempting thing to do is just to get the bishop on f1. But that's the whole point. It's another skewer. This just kind of, these are all asides, you know, beyond the main scope of the lesson. This is pretty fun. So we have a skewer, and the computer gave me a little assistance, because I mean, I may not have looked at that. I mean, I'm like, look, this is good enough. I'd probably do that. Hopefully in a tournament game, since this is such a cool move, hopefully I would look at it. So we have a skewer. Hopefully you guys would find it too. The queen moves away. Then we take this one in order to checkmate them in the corner. And that's why it's saying best thing you can do is he can give up his bishop, their bishop. Yeah, this is tough. So, and then it says -6, as if, well, by the way, we have bishop, bishop. So yeah, we still currently have the 2 rooks for the queen and the knight. So, and by the way, if you really want to, you can go bishop c4 and still win that thing. But we want bigger fish over here, right? So anyway, yeah, so the best move by the computer is saying queen d2. So we didn't look at that quite yet, but then it's just saying, okay, then we have like the invasion move. But interestingly, we're not winning a piece yet. Now we're seeing this congestion in their position. So again, just a sample line saying that it wants to cover to be able to take this pawn. So now we have this invasion happening. I mean, we got this is a pretty dangerous d3 pawn too. Now it's looking at, okay, now it says see, this is tough. This gets pretty tricky. And that's probably why the book that I was looking at probably didn't show the whole game, because it's just, you know, it's the main concept that matters. Because now we're getting into the weeds here. But basically, the cool thing is we're down material, but we have such a dominant position. And this was all attributable to our original push, which, by the way, that broke out. Remember I mentioned earlier, I was like, maybe you'll see that diagonal opening. It's opening up. It's possible, right? Well, the bishop happened to move away. We blasted open the diagonal. And in that other line, we ended up using the diagonal to checkmate him in the corner. And we used the back rank. Well, remember, so everything earlier on that we had analyzed, we don't know what's going to come into play. We just know these are resources that we have. They're assets. We don't know which one's going to come into play, but at least we know they're there, and we're hoping to employ them whenever as we can, right? So anyway, depends on the unique situation. So it's saying they take this one. Bishop takes with check. Oh, that's vicious. And then we ultimately get the queen back, because the king would have to walk into this, check, queen takes, pawn takes, and after all is said and done, we just end up with this extra pawns. So we both have 2, it boils down, we both have 2 bishops, but black is completely winning. No, look at that, the bishop takes this pawn. But black is winning because that one extra pawn on c2, not extra pawn, because, yeah, it is an extra pawn, my bad. Yeah, because that one extra pawn. Oh, and by the way, of course, the computer says, boom, just to finish it off, g5. And if they take, we take the center pawn, we check. Anyway, we're just destroying the position. Okay, we're just tearing it up. So just let's review this. So now does it make sense? Why we play d5? Well, it's kind of a process of elimination move as well, because we know we need to do something to our opponent. They're about to start squashing us. So we want to fight back. So we play d5. They bypass. Our knight naturally comes in the center. It's backed up. They take. Pawn takes back. Bishop's under attack. We gain a tempo on it. We go here. And I think even the computer said, oh, you can just play this and attack the pawn or something. But so the computer will say, oh, you should do something else sometimes. But even here, I'm seeing it somewhere like 5 moves in, it likes it or something. But this is the brilliant human game. So even if it doesn't say it, I think it's still a great move, right? And it worked out for him. So we double up on here, put the pressure. We spring forward with our knight. And see, just look at that. We're on move 6 now. Every single move, we're advancing something. We're putting additional, okay, rook came along, like I said, with retreating. This one didn't go backwards, but it kind of retreated. It retreated from the king side. And we moved from the corner into closer to the center on a half open file and attack. So we are advancing as well along even though it's along the back rank. This is obviously advancing a lot. Suddenly, the moment we go to c5, actually, we're ready to come in. So he obviously already had this idea in mind. Now, b4 probably just exacerbated matters for him, because now he does the same thing, but now that becomes, hey, there was that line where the bishop took the pawn, even better. Just, it didn't help him at all. So, yeah, anything else he does, like if he goes c4, you just take this one. Well, you just chew everything up. You could take this one. You could even take this one. It doesn't matter. But he can't even take, because then you take as a rook. So anyway, yeah, he just breaks through. And then I think it's fascinating though that he had calculated all of this, knowing that basically this is where the line stops. I think the book, I took it from Art of Defense in Chess, actually. That's where I found this game. And in Art of Defense in Chess, he stops here. And he said, did he say it? I said the counterattack was decisive, and he probably said something along the lines of, something about how black won. I don't think it continues from there. Either that or I looked at the game, but I got the cue was from this book. So sometimes you find a good book like that. It's great material for the course. So anyway, yeah, then the rest is just kind of playing around with it. You can use the computer to kind of come up with samples, be like, oh, what if this, what if that? And the computer will effectively give you the best move. So you can kind of test it out, see, make sure it actually works. Because now what people, what's happened is that people checked lines from like 50 years ago. They were thinking, oh, this is great for white. White's winning in this opening. And then they check it again, like, oh, it's actually a draw, or actually black has a slight advantage or something. So people go back with the computers and kind of check their assumptions with it if they use it. So they're basically using it in a responsible way, trying to use the computers as their friends, I guess, instead, as opposed to saying, here, computer, do everything on your own. More like they had a cyborg match. I think they've done cyborg matches. I think Kasparov's done one. Basically, it's a human and a computer versus a human and a computer. So that's basically what you're doing if you're looking at the analysis. You're basically, you're not just giving into it completely, but it's an aid, right? So it's giving you some ideas like, oh, I didn't think of rook to c3. Now, anyway, he does this move. He's down material, but he has the foresight to know that on the next move when he takes, if the queen takes, he's going to be getting that bishop back. But even without getting the bishop back, his position is so overwhelming that he could be down. Look, how many points is he actually down? He's down 1 point because he has so again, we have the queen and the knight for the 2 rooks and a pawn. So that's basically, we could say 11 for 12. But again, that's just roughly speaking to get a sense. But as you can see, the fact that he's down a point doesn't matter at all, because his position's so dominant. He's going to keep chewing it up, breaking through. But all of that is the result of this break, d5. So you guys have any thoughts about it? Any questions?
No
Yeah,
questions.
we covered a lot coming back into it first time, Christopher. Right? There's a lot in there.
Yeah.
You were grasping.
I think I need to go back to a couple of the opening moves whenever you have a chance to do that. But I'm gonna need to sign off for right now.
Okay.
And so is this class regular to go about 2 hours or an hour and a half, or so I can manage my time. What's generally
You know, well, we used to. I guess I'll pause the video now and we'll chat about it. We stop the video. All right, and I'll put that up on YouTube.